Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Star Wars Superweapon Iceberg. I'm really happy that people have been enjoying part 1. Thank you all so much for your support. This series has been a tough endeavor for me and I've never done anything like this. But seeing all this positivity surrounding it fills my heart with joy and definitely pushed me forward to get this second part out as soon as possible. If you have watched part 1 of the video, you know the deal. But if you need a quick refresher, in this video series, we will look at nearly all Star Wars superweapons seen throughout the franchise across all its media, starting from the popular stuff and ending with more obscure entries. We will look at what each superweapon does, how dangerous it is, who made it, and the most notable events the weapon participated in. I highly recommend you watch part 1 of this series before you jump into this one, so that you can get a better picture of all the superweapons that will be featured, and to also understand any references I might make to superweapons looked at prior. One thing I omitted from the first part that I wish to mention now is that Star Wars has two different canons, Disney canon and the Legends canon. Essentially, a lot of expanded universe stories and events were made between the release of A New Hope in 1977 and Disney's purchase of Star Wars property in 2012. After Disney bought Star Wars, they decanonized most of these stories outside of the mainline movies and the Clone Wars TV show, and put them all as a separate unofficial canon, which is now collectively known as the Legends canon. And following that, they started their own expanded universe referred to by Star Wars fans as the Disney canon. Most of the superweapons we will look at today come from Legends canon, though some do also come from Disney canon. So to avoid confusion and make things more concise, I will add a small infographic notifying you if a superweapon comes from Disney or Legends canon on the top right corner of the video. Fair warning, a lot of the superweapons featured here will be quite crazy, so get ready for a wild ride. Strap in and hope that our Gungan Bongo is working well, as we are once again diving into the iceberg. We will now be looking at Layer 3 of the iceberg. This layer contains superweapons that predominantly feature in Star Wars books and comics. Stuff that most people, except really curious Star Wars fans, probably don't know anything about. Centerpoint Station, also known as the Whirlpooler or I'm not gonna try to pronounce that, was a massive and ancient superweapon constructed more than 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, making it one of the oldest superweapons found on this iceberg. It was built by an ancient race of insect aliens called the Killiks, and the construction was led by a powerful race called the Celestials, namely the Daughter and the Son. Yes, the same ones from the Clone Wars show if you watched the Mortis arc. Centerpoint Station was 100 kilometers wide and 350 kilometers long, making its size be somewhere between the sizes of the first and the second Death Stars. The structure of the station was described as very alien, even by Star Wars standards, and modern explorers were unable to exactly figure out how the weapon was able to function. All that is understood is that the center of the station consisted of a hollowed out area 60 kilometers wide that contained the station's tractor beam projector and the power source of the station, a large ball of energy floating in midair, called the glow point. The glow point area was surrounded by decks where sentients could reside within, despite the potential hazards of being near a giant ball of energy. Two cylindrical branches extended from the center of the station, and the tractor beam could fire out of either of these branches. The station itself contained an intricate collection of ultra-high energy systems that could generate immense amounts of magnetic, nuclear, electric, tractor beam, and hyperspace energy. All this energy would be used to power the so-called hyperspace tractor beam. As you can probably guess by its name, this tractor beam was powerful enough to pierce the veil of hyperspace and travel through a hyperspace route to any target on the other side. The station could use this tractor beam to pull moons, planets, stars, and even frickin' black holes to any location that is within its operational range. The station could also use the immense gravitic energy contained within the tractor beam to crush these celestial objects. Besides these terrifying facts, The exact mechanism of function of this tractor beam projector is a total mystery to the residents of the Star Wars galaxy, and no such analog could be replicated with the technology available during the pre- and post-Imperial era. Another added mystery of the Centerpoint Station is that it is found within the Corellia system, specifically right between two planets within the system, Talos and Tralis. Both planets seem to orbit the station, while also orbiting the system's star simultaneously. Although it's possible a potentially weaker version of the tractor beam projector is being used to hold both planets in their places, no concrete proof has ever been given to that theory. Overall, as has just been described, the station was incredibly mysterious, eldritch, and, most pressingly, very dangerous, as it had the potential to eradicate entire star systems from a long range. The added dangers to this was the fact that the station was located in the Corellia sector, which was in the core world section of the galaxy, the most populated part of it. This meant that although the station had limited operational range, it could be used on a myriad of inhabited targets. Although Centerpoint Station existed for 100 millennia, most of its past is shrouded in mystery, just like everything about the station. What is known is that it was made by the Celestials, ancient beings of the Force alleged to be millions of years old. They were helped by the Killiks, who were gifted the power of the Force by the Celestials to create the station over the course of many years. Once completed, the Celestials stripped the Killiks of the Force and took over the superweapon. The Celestials would use the station to create multiple star systems throughout the galaxy, including the Corellia system, where the station would be found residing. It would also be used to create a collection of black holes near the Kessel system called the Maw, which was done in order to trap a Lovecraftian monster named Abeloth. Many millennia later, the Celestials would be forced to disappear from the known galaxy by the Rakatan Infinite Empire, leaving the superweapon behind. It is unknown if the Rakata used the superweapon for their own nefarious deeds, but once the Rakatan Infinite Empire fell, their remnant slaves within the Corellia system began colonizing Centerpoint Station. They would spend many millennia living on the station, existing in a self-sustaining cycle, while not actually understanding what the true purpose of the station was. Throughout this time, many scientists came and went to the station in an attempt to research it and its potential purposes, but most of the station would remain a perplexing mystery to them. 500 years before the Battle of Yavin, the governments of the twin planets Talos and Tralis founded the Federation of the Double Worlds, a joint government independent from the central authority of their system on the planet Corellia. They would then take over control of the Centerpoint Station, and the administration over the station was given to a group called the Executive Secretariat, which would continue to control the station even during the Galactic Empire and New Republic eras. 18 years after the Battle of Yavin, the government of the planet Sikoria wanted to break away from the New Republic, and chose Centerpoint Station as their negotiation tool. Their scientists made a breakthrough and discovered how to control the superweapons tractor beam technology and how to weaponize it. They tested the tractor beam on a distant star, causing it to explode. This also caused the glow point within the center of the station to increase in size and become much hotter, incinerating all the colonists that had lived inside the station for the many millennia. The Sokorian insurrectionists then took control of the station from the Secretariat and used it to explode another sun. But the insurrectionists were eventually defeated by the New Republic in a climactic battle in the Corellian sector. The weapon was then used in the Second Galactic Civil War, 40 years after the Battle of Yavin, by the Corellian government as they seceded from the Galactic Alliance due to increasing taxes and limitations imposed by the Alliance after the galaxy-wide massacre that was the Yuuzhan Vong War. They would use the weapon to blast the Galactic Alliance fleet with repulsor energy, completely obliterating the fleet. The station would meet its ultimate end in the most unexpected of ways. When Luke Skywalker realized how dangerous the weapon was in anyone's hands, he launched a raid on the station with other Jedi. While the Jedi were fighting the Corellian Confederates, Shaa, a scientist who worked on the Centerpoint Station and was a double agent for the Galactic Alliance, sabotaged the superweapon. He overrode the station's map database coordinates to all target the station itself, and then fled it alongside the Jedi. A disgruntled Corellian technician on the station saw the opportunity to use the weapon during the fighting. He wanted to use it to destroy Coruscant as revenge for the death of his wife at the hands of the Galactic Alliance soldiers. When he fired the tractor beam, Centerpoint Station targeted itself, causing an immense gravitic pulse to burst out of the station, destroying it completely. Alright folks, strap in. This one's gonna be a wild ride. The Suncrusher was, without any hyperbolics, one of the most powerful superweapons ever conceived in Star Wars. It is a ship the size of a standard starfighter, yet possessed the utility and weaponry that rivaled even the most powerful superweapons we have seen so far on the iceberg. It had nigh indestructible armor, and I mean, this ship's armor was so strong that it survived a point-blank shot from the Death Star's prototype super laser, though it did sustain a little bit of damage. Worth to point out that the Death Star prototype could obliterate planetoids, so a little starfighter being able to take a hit from the thing is pretty fucking impressive. The Suncrusher's main weaponry were energy resonance torpedoes, which, when fired at a star, would burrow into its core, releasing dense packets of energy that rendered the star's core unstable. This would initiate a chain reaction that forced even low-mass stars to go supernova, destroying not only the star, but the entire star system. I think I have beaten this point like a dead horse by now, but this thing is about the same size as an X-Wing, and it does all this shit. What were they thinking? The Suncrusher, like many insane things in Star Wars, was created at the Maw Installation. The Maw Installation was a secret Imperial research facility located at, and you guessed it, the Maw. While it had a lot of funding from the Empire, the station was mostly isolated, and its projects were unvetted, resulting in a lot of wacky shit like this being developed there. The Suncrusher was initially stolen from the installation by Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Jedi Knight Kyp Durron 11 years after the Battle of Yavin. Realizing the destructive capabilities of the ship, the three decided to place the ship inside the gas giant Yavin, safely hidden within the planet and not easy to access due to immense atmospheric pressure. However, not long after this, Kyp Durron was corrupted by the spirit of Exar Kun and was turned to the dark side. Kyp took the Suncrusher and used it to create great havoc against Imperial remnant forces, and even caused the destruction of the Caritas system, killing countless sentients. Durron would eventually come to his senses, and in an effort to redeem himself, would destroy the Suncrusher by flying it into a black hole. Shortly before the Suncrusher reached the black hole, Durron squeezed himself in a tiny message pod and shot himself out of the superweapon. It would then be crushed by the gravity of the black hole. I put that message pod part there just to accentuate how ridiculous this whole story was. If there was ever a Mary Sue for superweapons, the Suncrusher would definitely be it. A Mary Super weapon, if you will. The Tarkin Project, or as I like to call it, the Death Star 1.5, was a superweapon developed by the Galactic Empire 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. It was a massive battle station, which consisted of an Ionic cannon superlaser, a set of powerful engines, and a defensive shield generator. It could cause as much destruction as the original Death Star, without the weakness the prior superweapon possessed. It also had a power reactor, a powerful tractor beam generator, escape pods, and hangar bays. In layman's terms, it's the Death Star without the ball shape and with a shield generator. The superweapon was named in honor of the late Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, who had died aboard the original Death Star. The Tarkin project was designed by Bevel Lemelisk, the original creator of the Death Star in Legends canon. The Death Star's designer was to produce a resurrected version of the iconic superweapon, even larger and more powerful than the first. At the same time, the Emperor had already ordered the construction of a pair of massive warships equipped with axial superlasers, the Eclipse-class dreadnoughts, which we looked at prior. To prevent the Rebel Alliance from discovering the new Death Star, and to test the ship's mounted superlaser of his new warships, the Emperor moved Lemelisk away from leading the construction of the second Death Star, and instead tasked him with developing a prototype of the Eclipse class into an operational weapons platform. This was the design goal of the Tarkin project, as a testbed for the Eclipse class dreadnought superlaser. About 3 years after it was first commissioned by the Emperor, the Tarkin Station was completed, becoming yet another toy in Palpatine's toy box of death and destruction. The only time the Tarkin Station's superlaser was used at its true might was to destroy the volcanic planet Ionic 2. The planet possessed precious Stygium crystals. These crystals were invaluable in creating effective cloaking technology the Empire needed for its other weapon projects, such as the TIE Phantom, a starfighter capable of going completely invisible. Unfortunately for the Empire, Ionic 2's Stygium mines were emptied before they got the amount they wanted, and the remaining crystals could only be found very deep within the planet's crust. The acquiring of these crystals was deemed too expensive under normal circumstances, but the Empire still saw fit to get them. Grand Admiral Martio Batch, the person in charge of developing Empire's cloaking technology, devised a plan to get these crystals. He commandeered the Tarkin and had its superlaser explode Ionic 2, releasing the remaining Stygium crystals into space, which could then be collected easily. Following the destruction of Ionic 2, the existence of the Tarkin was made known to the Rebel Alliance. The rebels realized that they had yet another planet killer on their hands, and it was decided that the Tarkin Station had to be destroyed ASAP. A rebel commando strike team was organized, consisting of Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and the droids C-3PO and R2-D2, the only rebels to have infiltrated the original Death Star and survived. And also because the story was written in the 80s, and the writers couldn't help but include the main characters of the movies to sell the fucking comics. The rebels easily infiltrated the superweapon. But oh no! It just so happened that Darth Vader also arrived on the Tarkin to perform an inspection. What a coincidence! He immediately sensed Luke's presence on the station and decided to hunt him down and turn him to the dark side. The Tarkin Station went on full alert, and our heroes had to act quickly. The rebel team split up to each do their own tasks. Chewbacca and the droids were to disable the tractor beam, Leia was to secure the escape route for the team, and Luke was to rig the main power reactor to explode. However, Luke was confronted by Darth Vader and lost the explosives he needed to sabotage the reactor in the scuffle. Luckily for the rebels, Leia found the central mechanism in charge of firing the superlaser, and it was not any different from the one used in the original Death Star. Leia remembered the original schematics of the Death Star and somehow figured out which wires she had to switch to make the superlaser faulty. Luke escaped Vader, and him and the other rebels met up and hijacked an Imperial transport. They escaped the Tarkin, but were pursued by Vader and a squadron of TIE fighters. One of the people in charge of the battle station, Colonel Nord, ordered a superweapon be fired at the rebels and Darth Vader, hoping it would cripple the rebellion and kill the Sith Lord, who the commanding staff at the Tarkin were sick and tired of, considering his less than ideal status as a boss. However, Leia's sabotage worked. Right as the Tarkin Station was about to fire, it detonated, creating a massive fireball in space, which nearly consumed the ships the rebels and the Dark Lord were in. The explosion instantly swallowed 2 nearby Star Destroyers and a dozen more smaller vessels, and released billions of debris fragments, as well as electromagnetic radiation interference that prevented any local ship-to-ship communication. The rebels used this chaos to hyperspace away, and the Empire was left dazed by yet another one of their multi-billion credit projects being flushed down the space toilet. Despite the destruction of the superweapon, the super laser was still perceived as a success, and years later its design was fitted out on the Eclipse-class dreadnoughts, which were used by the Reborn Emperor in his war with the New Republic. The Galaxy Gun was a superweapon built by the Dark Empire 10 years after the Battle of Yavin. It was supposed to be the ultimate superweapon devised by the Reborn Emperor Palpatine. It was designed and built by Umak Leth, one of the chief engineers of the Death Star, and one that replaced Bevel Lemelisk as the master of Imperial projects, after the latter was dishonored due to the destruction of the original Death Star. The Galaxy Gun was a 7,250-meter-long tube-shaped space station built over Biss while being protected by a massive Imperial fleet. It fired large, destructive projectiles equipped with particle disintegrator warheads, capable of destroying an entire planet. It was also equipped with a hyperdrive and sublight thrusters, allowing it to move if necessary. What made the superweapon so dangerous is that the projectiles it fired possessed their own hyperdrives, allowing them to go into hyperspace. This meant the weapon could target anything within the galaxy, and the projectile would travel through hyperspace and hit its target in a relatively quick time. This also meant the projectile was hard to track, and its target was nearly impossible to know until it exited hyperspace. In addition, the projectile had its own defense system, meaning it would deter any attacks launched at it using laser cannons and powerful energy shielding. Once the projectile reached its designated target, which was usually a planet, the warhead would detonate, causing a powerful nucleonic reaction that would cause all matter it touched to disintegrate. The warhead's power could be changed. At maximum power, the warhead would essentially delete the planet and its inhabitants off the face of the galaxy. But it could be detonated at lower power, only Control plus Xing certain parts of the planet, such as cities and military bases. Because of this incredible destructive power and versatility, this weapon is often considered to be one of the most powerful superweapons ever seen in the Star Wars galaxy. Due to its capabilities to disintegrate a planet from across the galaxy, the weapon was named the Galaxy Gun. The first time the Galaxy Gun was used was during Operation Shadowhand, shortly after the New Republic destroyed the Reborn Emperor's citadel on Biss. As retaliation, Palpatine ordered the superweapon to be used against the Pinnacle Moon, which housed the New Republic base. The superweapon fired, and shortly thereafter the weapon's projectile reached Pinnacle Moon and completely obliterated it. Thankfully, due to the New Republic moles on the planet Biss, the Republic knew beforehand where the projectile was gonna hit and managed to evacuate the moon in time. The Emperor then proceeded to use the weapon haphazardly to destroy several unruly worlds and crippling the New Republic, while millions of lives would be lost as a result of this massacre. Any attack the New Republic attempted to launch against the superweapon was thwarted by the massive Imperial fleet surrounding the weapon. The Galaxy Gun was also used on non-planetoid targets, such as a New Republic troop transport Pelagia, which was carrying about 100,000 troops before it was completely disintegrated. As one would expect, Palpatine's uncompromising evil would also be the cause of his and the weapon's downfalls. The Imperial officers and royal guards saw how the Emperor gleefully used the Galaxy Gun to extinguish so many lives as if it's a kid's toy. They were deeply shaken by these psychotic acts and decided to commit conspiracy against the Reborn Emperor. They secretly tampered with his genetic material, making it so every time he would be cloned anew, the new clone would come out progressively more messed up. During the final battle between the Reborn Emperor Palpatine and the New Republic over the planet Onderon, the Emperor died for the final time as his final clone body looked like he was left out in the sun for like 50 years. The genetic material was in such poor condition that he could no longer be cloned. As his last body was breaking apart, he attempted to force his spirit into a young Anakin Solo. However, it was forcibly dragged into the chaos that is between the Force by a dying Jedi named Brand, causing Palpatine to permanently die. In parallel, the Emperor's flagship, the Eclipse II, was sabotaged by R2-D2, who had the ship's hyperdrive navigation set to BIS, where the Galaxy Gun was being prepared to fire at Onderon. Right before the superweapon could fire, the Eclipse II came out of hyperspace. Umak Leth was on board the Galaxy Gun at this time, and he spent his last moments in terror as the Eclipse II rammed into his creation, causing both weapons to explode. Because the Galaxy Gun was about to fire when the Eclipse II crashed into it, the armed and loaded projectile was discharged out of the space station as it was crumbling. The projectile then fell onto BIS, which resulted in the entire planet being obliterated, along with all Imperial loyalists still on the planet. This would result in the end of the Dark Empire and Operation Shadowhand. The Orbital Nightcloak was a superweapon developed by the Galactic Empire, though it was primarily used after its downfall by the Imperial warlord Zinj. It was a collection of satellites that would surround the planet and block any sunlight or any other type of electromagnetic light from reaching the planet. This would also prevent any heat from reaching its target, slowly freezing it and causing a permanent winter night. This made it a wonderful way to coax a planet's inhabitants to subjugate themselves to the owner of the Orbital Nightcloak. Each Orbital Nightcloak satellite was solar powered, so they could theoretically work indefinitely. However, while they could be deactivated remotely by the controller of the satellites, due to their chain programming, if even one satellite was destroyed, the rest of them would be disabled as well. In addition, the satellites themselves had no defensive systems to speak of, so they had to be protected by the Imperial Navy to operate without interruption. There are only a few known cases of the Orbital Nightcloak being used, and it had primarily been used during the New Republic's war with the Imperial warlord Zinj, around 7 years after the Battle of Yavin. Zinj was a former High Admiral of the Galactic Empire. After the Battle of Endor, however, he splintered away from the crumbling empire and became an independent warlord, vying to create his own galactic empire. The first time the Orbital Nightcloak was used was during the Battle of Selagus. While being pursued by the New Republic fleet, Zinj hid his Executor-class flagship, the Iron Fist, inside an Orbital Nightcloak network deployed near a decoy superstar destroyer, the Second Death. He hyperspaced away while being hidden by the Nightcloak. The Second Death was in reality a bunch of trash and debris assembled to look like an SSD. It would shortly thereafter be blown up by remote explosives. Due to the electromagnetic wavelength blocking properties of the Orbital Nightcloak, the New Republic hadn't realized that the Iron Fist hyperspaced away, and when they saw the Second Death detonate in an asteroid field, they had presumed that the Iron Fist was destroyed, and Zinj escaped on a shuttle. In reality, Zinj and his flagship hyperspaced to Dathomir to prepare for one final battle with the New Republic. The second time the Orbital Nightcloak was used was during the final battle I mentioned on the planet Dathomir, where the planet was engulfed in darkness and held hostage by Zinj. He demanded that the Dathomirians gave up Han Solo, who was stranded on the planet during the battle. In exchange, Zinj would turn off the superweapon and prevent the planet from being turned into a ball of ice. While Han Solo was given off to Zinj, the Orbital Nightcloak continued to operate over the planet. It was only turned off when Han Solo escaped Zinj's capture, got back on the Millennium Falcon, killed Zinj by blowing up the Iron Fist's bridge, and destroyed one of the satellites orbiting Dathomir, causing the network of satellites to turn off and sunlight to once again shine on the planet. Didn't make it a nice place to live, but at least it was a bit more livable after that. While not possessing any actual weaponry, the Orbital Nightcloak had enough interesting utility to make it a very terrifying superweapon, and it also made Zinj the Mr. Burns of Star Wars, since both were greedy assholes who had used giant dishes to block out the sun. The Infinity Gates were a collection of structures that were built by the ancient civilization of Kwa, which was the dominant species within the Star Wars galaxy before the rise of the Rakatan Infinite Empire, who we talked about before in the previous part of this iceberg. The Infinity Gates' prime purpose was to enable near instantaneous travel between different parts of the galaxy. However, the energy these gates produced could also be used as a superweapon. This energy was called the Infinity Waves. The Infinity Waves could be projected at any planet in the galaxy, and once they struck a planet, this would result in it collapsing into infinity, presumably killing everything on that planet. Or maybe worse. The resulting destruction would also cause gravitational abnormalities around the impact area of space, which would in turn make hyperspace travel impossible in the affected area. The Infinity Gates were found within massive pyramid-shaped star temples, which were constructed by the Kwa across many different planets, most notably on the planets Tython and Dathomir. Once the Kwa started losing power and the Rakatan Empire was beginning to rise up, the Kwa sealed the star temples and put many traps within them to prevent any non-Kwa from using the Infinity Gates. The Kwa civilization would ultimately crumble, and its remnants turned into primitive dinosaur-like Kui, which would continue to guard the Infinity Gates for thousands of years. 31 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Night Sisters of Dathomir unlocked the Star Temple located on their planet, and wanted to use the secrets found within against the Galactic Republic. The sisters managed to find and unlock the Infinity Gate, letting them control the potential superweapon. The superweapon was used by the Night Sisters to annihilate the planet Ova, which was not far from Dathomir. The apparent vanishing of Ova concerned the Jedi Order, and Jedi Knight Quinlan Voss was sent out to investigate Dathomir, as the Jedi correctly assumed that the Night Sisters were behind the planet's disappearance. Quinlan Voss had a very adventurous investigation into this matter, which you can read more about in the comic labeled Star Wars Republic: Infinity's End. It is a good read, though finding and buying one might be an issue for some, but I'm sure there are ways to get them legally. Anyways, during his investigation, Voss discovered that the Night Sisters planned to use the Infinity Waves to destroy several core worlds of the Galactic Republic. The master of this plot was Zalem, the matriarch of one of the several Night Sister clans. Before the Jedi Knight could stop her, Zalem fired an Infinity Wave at Coruscant. Shortly thereafter, Quinlan was able to defeat Zalem and her followers, and reverse the Infinity Wave back towards the Infinity Gate. He escaped, while also saving a Night Sister named Ross Lai, because he claims he saw good in her. Yeah, dude, we'd believe that. The Infinity Wave then crashed back onto the temple, and while not causing Dathomir to collapse into infinity like the planet Ova, the temple and the Infinity Gate within it were obliterated completely. It is worth noting that it is not entirely clear if the other Infinity Gates found across the different planets the Kwa Empire used to control were safe and left untouched. But considering no other planet had turned into voids of infinity, it's likely no one else had unlocked the secrets of the Star Temples. The Corsair was a Darthan-class battleship that was initially a flagship of the great ancient Sith Lord Naga Sadow, and was used extensively by the old Sith during the Great Hyperspace Wars, 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. While the battleship itself was no different from most other Darthan-class ships used by the Sith at the time, the Corsair's unique feature were powerful force-enhancing crystals contained within it. These crystals could do great destructive feats, namely, ripping out the core of a star, causing the stellar object to destabilize and explode, which resulted in great pandemonium within the star system. The crystals generated immense power, so they required equally powerful force users to control their power output. Naga Sadow used the Corsair throughout the Great Hyperspace War. However, once the Sith started losing the war, he used his flagship to scorch Earth. Or, scorch space? He used his flagship's power to manipulate stars to cover his retreat and escape to the outer rim of the galaxy. He would then hide his ship on the moon Yavin 4 and had his enslaved Massassi warriors build a massive temple over the ship. 1,000 years later, the ship was rediscovered by the Sith Lord Exar Kun. The ship was perfectly preserved despite the big time gap, and Kun used the Corsair to wage his own war against the Republic and the Jedi Order, alongside his closest ally, Ulic Qel-Droma. During this war, labeled the Great Sith War, Exar Kun hadn't used the Corsair to its full destructive potential, as it had been used 1,000 years before. This is assumedly because, even though Exar Kun was a powerful Force user, he knew his powers paled in comparison to Naga Sadao's. Hence why it would be difficult for him to control the superweapon. The last time this battleship was used was during the Battle of Kemplex 9, where it was helmed by Qel-Droma's lover, Alima Keto, and an underling of Exar Kun, Credo. Alima and Credo failed both Qel-Droma and Exar Kun several times, so the two Sith Lords decided to get rid of them in a flashy way. Prior to the Battle of Kemplex 9, Exar Kun explained to Alima and Credo how to use the powerful star-destroying crystals. However, he did not tell them the power necessary to control this destructive tool. During the battle, Alima used the ship's ultimate power to destroy the Republic fleet with a ripped-out core of a star. However, she overestimated herself and lost control of the ship's power. A chain reaction caused the nearby star cluster to go supernova, destroying the Corsair and ending the lives of Alima and Credo. This goes to show that the Sith are so spiteful that they are willing to sacrifice a powerful superweapon just to cut people out of their lives. The Blackwing Virus, also known as the Imperial Bioweapons Project, I-71A, or simply as the Sickness in ancient times, was a very lethal pathogen developed by the ancient Sith thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin. The pathogen was an airborne virus, but it could also be transmitted using saliva. Once the virus entered the victim, it rapidly destroyed them from the inside and threw their body functions into disarray. The victim became pale and weak, experienced issues with breathing, and their mental faculties would decline. Eventually, the victim would begin to violently bleed inside and out, until finally, and painfully, dying. Shortly after the victim's death, their body's nervous system would kick back into action, effectively bringing the person back to life. However, the victim lost all higher brain function, functioning as a mindless carrier of the disease, whose goal was to kill, eat, and spread the Blackwing Virus further. I think most of you by now have realized what is going on here. The Blackwing Virus is Star Wars' take on a zombie virus. In addition to its aforementioned symptoms, the sickness would affect different species differently. For example, a disgusting gray fluid would build up within infected Wookiees until their bodies burst from the fluid overflow. While they are still alive, mind you! Eventually, the infected Wookiees would enter a state of permanent frenzy and attack everyone, sometimes making it impossible to tell when and if a Wookiee actually died from the disease before going apeshit. Another example is the Rodians, who would literally puke their guts out shortly before dying. The Blackwing Virus was originally created by the Sith Lord Darth thousands of years ago as an attempt to create an elixir of immortality, using a rare plant called the Murakami Orchid. However, his experiments failed, and he succumbed to the sickness. 1,000 years later, another Sith Lord by the name of Darth Scabrous attempted to recreate the pathogen with the same goal of immortality. Unfortunately for Scabrous and everyone in his vicinity, his experiments also crumbled. But this time, his failure caused the virus to spread across the entire Sith Academy he was doing experiments in. This turned all the Sith within it into ravenous undead monsters. Thankfully, due to the fact that the Academy was established deep within a cold and remote planet named Audicor Foston, The virus and its victims didn't have an easy way to escape, making this outbreak self-contained. Thousands of years later, the secrets of this virus were acquired by Darth Vader. He ordered a team of Imperial scientists to re-engineer the virus so it could be used as a biological weapon. The efforts to rebuild the disease were conducted on a top-secret Imperial-class Star Destroyer named Vector, and the virus was codenamed Blackwing. However, as can be surmised by how it has been handled in the past, there was yet another freaking incident aboard the Vector, causing the disease to spread across the entire ship, turning nearly all of her crew into zombies. What made the Blackwing virus even more unique is the fact that although it was a pathogen, due to its Sith origins, it had some anomalous aspects to it. Namely, it was self-aware and had a collective mind. The mind that governed the virus had drives and motives of its own, and worked outside the will of its Sith creators. As such, the virus could manipulate its undead trolls to work together to spread itself to as many sentients as possible. This is why, when the crew of the Vector was taken over by the virus, the zombies commandeered the ship to attack a prison barge called the Purge, which forced the inhabitants of the barge to enter the Vector and be attacked by the zombies found within. Some victims of the virus would also describe hallucinating black arms attacking them, or a maw opening within their chest shortly before dying. Whether this is how the virus's mind manifests within their victim's consciousness, or simply a random hallucination, is unknown. Also, what made this virus more dangerous and potent than most other plagues are two things. First is the fact that it could spread through the air, meaning it had more potential to infect very many people. Second is the fact that there was no known cure for the virus. Unlike the Ragul plague, for which there was a serum that could prevent an infected person from turning, no such cure existed for the Blackwing virus. There were antivirals that could prevent people from contracting the virus, but if a sentient got bit or otherwise infected without these antivirals, they were basically down for the count. This makes the Blackwing virus one of the most dangerous and destructive biological superweapons found in the Star Wars galaxy. The Blackwing virus was never truly eradicated, only contained by the Empire. Some of the undead crew of the Vector would use the starfighters docked within the ship to fly away to spread the disease. But once the individual undead flew a considerable distance from the Vector, they would lose their connection to the virus's collective consciousness, and lost all mental faculties, making them float aimlessly through space, hopefully to never be discovered. The rest of the Vector was eventually contained by the Empire's cleanup crew, and the research into the virus was moved to a secret facility on Dathomir. To the surprise of no one at this point, the virus broke out of its containment once again, turning nearly every living thing within the facility and its surrounding area into mindless zombies, including fierce rancors and cunning Night Sisters. The area was made into a massive quarantine zone with multiple outposts. Eventually, the Empire contained the outbreak once again, and what remained of the virus was taken into Imperial custody. What happened to the virus afterwards is left unknown. The Darksaber, no, not that one, this one, was a superweapon built by the Hutt crime lord Durga Bazari Tai. Durga was the leader of the galaxy's criminal underworld, following the death of both Jabba the Hutt and Prince Xizor. However, he craved more power, so he chose to develop a mighty superweapon which he could use to hold entire planets hostage. A bit of a side tangent, but I just want to point out that Durga's title was His Great Obesity, the Lord Durga. Really makes you see what kind of a creature Durga was to have this title of His Great Obesity. Anyways, the Darksaber began construction 12 years after the Battle of Yavin, based on the plans of the original Death Star and designed by our good old friend Bevel Lemelisk. To make the weapon unique, and to probably save up on costs, Durga ordered the Darksaber to not have the same shape as the Death Star, but instead the superweapon only consisted of the central super laser, surrounded by a protective layer. This made the superweapon look like a lightsaber hilt, hence how it got its name. The superweapon would fire a powerful laser beam, akin to the one seen on the Death Star, or the Eclipse-class Dreadnought, though the exact power of this laser was disputed, as it was never successfully tested. Despite Durga's great ambitions, his greed made his superweapon a failure even during its construction. The materials used in the construction of the Darksaber were cheap and of poor quality, and the computer systems installed on it were outdated. Also, the species Durga hired to construct the superweapon, the Tauril, would often get distracted by minute things. The result of all this was that the Darksaber was built quite shitty, with parts of the weapon built in the wrong place, or the wrong way, or left out altogether. In spite of this, and Lemelisk's poor outlook on the project, Durga ordered the superweapon to be finished as soon as possible. The Darksaber's construction was done in the asteroid field near the planet Hoth, and a lot of the resources used for the Darksaber were acquired from the asteroids. As the Darksaber project was nearing completion, the New Republic was made aware of its existence. Understanding that a hut with a super laser is 10 times worse than the Empire, a commando strike team was immediately dispatched to disable the superweapon before it could be complete, which would then be followed by an attack from the New Republic's fleet. The commando team, led by General Krix Maydeen, followed Durga's space yacht all the way to the superweapon. It sneaked aboard it by gripping onto the superweapon and ripping off a loose plate from its hull. Despite their best attempts to remain stealthy, they messed up just like I usually do when playing Splinter Cell. While the other 2 commandos died in combat, General Maydeen was captured and brought before Durga on the superweapons bridge. While Maydeen managed to send out a distress signal to the New Republic, he was executed by Durga before help could arrive. As the New Republic fleet, led by General Wedge Antilles, arrived in Hoth's asteroid field, the Hutt decided that it was time to bring the Darksaber online. Lemelisk advised him against doing so, pointing out that the weapon was not yet tested, but Durga was unmoved and was confident that nothing could go wrong. Believing otherwise, Lemelisk promptly escaped under the pretense of going to monitor the super laser. This is just a Three Stooges act at this point. But anyways, Durga ordered the pilot of the Darksaber, Sulamar, to evade pursuit in the asteroid field, while the super laser was charging. Afraid of disobeying Durga, Sulamar complied and barely navigated through the sea of asteroids for some time, dodging as many of the rocks as possible. However, the New Republic forces soon caught up with the Darksaber and started assaulting it, slowly piercing through its cheap armor with each shot fired. In an effort to escape the Republic fleet, Durga ordered Sulamar to fly through the most dangerous part of the asteroid field. Once there, 2 massive asteroids were coming directly towards the Darksaber. Durga ordered for the Darksaber to fire on the 2 asteroids. But when Sulamar tried to fire the laser, it didn't work, since, as we established by now, this fucking weapon was just held together by tape and sticks. The 2 massive asteroids then crushed the Darksaber, killing Durga and his underlings. This is also the end of Lemelisk, as despite his escape attempt, he was captured by the New Republic fleet shortly after the Darksaber was destroyed. He would be tried for his countless war crimes and executed. I bet he was very sad in his last moments. He worked on so many terrifying projects, and his last one was just an absolute piece of shit. World Devastators, also known as World Smashers, World Sweepers, Planet Smashers, or City Eaters, were superweapons developed by the Galactic Empire some time before the completion of the Death Star, and deployed 10 years after the Battle of Yavin by the reborn Emperor Palpatine's Dark Empire. Essentially flying mass production factories, World Devastators possessed powerful tractor beams, which they would use to rip open the crust of a planet to acquire the minerals and ore hidden within it. These minerals and ore would then be used to manufacture droid starships, starfighters, combat vehicles, and infantry, which could quickly engage the enemy the World Devastators were facing. Some later models of the World Devastators were even capable of using mined materials to upgrade themselves, making themselves bigger, stronger, and more durable. No two older World Devastators were the same, as the upgrades would be made depending on what is necessary for the ship at the time, and the resources available. Given enough time and resources, the World Devastators could even manufacture more of their kind. A World Devastator was controlled by an artificial intelligence. The biological crew was only present to oversee the production happening within the ship, and assist in navigation and weapon firing. But for the most part, all World Devastators were completely autonomous. The shields of these machines were so strong that even concentrated turbo laser fire could not penetrate them, and in most situations, any contact with another enemy ship would result in its consumption by the World Devastator. The World Devastators also possessed top-of-the-line weaponry, consisting of many turbo lasers, proton torpedoes, and missile launchers. So to recap, we have a nigh invulnerable, heavily armed, autonomous, self-upgrading, and self-replicating flying factories that can create several dozens of fighters and droids in seconds that instantly engage any enemy. All while the factory can get its materials for production directly from the planet's crust. I don't know whether to be impressed by the Empire's ingenuity or be surprised that the World Devastators didn't rebel against their creators and take over the galaxy on their own. As you can probably tell if you watched the previous part of this Iceberg series, these superweapons are quite similar to the Starforge. However, the main difference is that the World Devastators could self-replicate, creating a potential armada of mini Starforges. The best example of the use of the World Devastators was seen during the Battle of Mon Cala, the homeworld of fan-favorite Admiral Ackbar. The Dark Empire attacked the planet 10 years after the Battle of Yavin. Ships built by the Mon Calamari were an instrumental piece of the New Republic's fleet, so decimating their planet would both hurt the production of new ships for the New Republic and also hurt its morale. Led by the massive Silencer 7, a fleet of World Devastators descended on Mon Cala, smashing the floating cities and shipyards, and feeding their factories in anticipation of a New Republic counterstrike. These factories would produce various assault vehicles, including TIE droid fighters and wavewalkers. Admiral Ackbar sent a New Republic fleet to deal with the devastating attack on his homeworld. Yet nothing the New Republic threw at the Devastators could stop their inexorable march. The World Devastators launched automated droid TIE fighters against the Republic starfighters, and one Devastator even headed into orbit to face the New Republic's Star Destroyer, the Emancipator. The Devastator devoured the Star Destroyer in its boiling furnace, leaving nothing behind in its wake, and using its materials to manufacture more droids. While Rogue Squadron was able to destroy 3 smaller World Devastators, the Republic fleet was no match for the bigger and mightier ones. Luckily, behind the scenes, a plan was unfolding. During the rise of the Dark Empire, Luke Skywalker joined the Reborn Emperor and became his new apprentice. However, unbeknownst to the Emperor, Luke was actually doing this so he could sabotage the Dark Empire from within. He smuggled a load of valuable data from the Empire into the Republic's hands, including system vulnerabilities of the World Devastator AI. With the help of R2-D2, these AI were injected with the virus. This virus caused these City Eaters to go haywire and attack and crash into each other, resulting in the utter destruction of their whole fleet. Any World Devastators that were found to remain after the fight seemed to be quote-unquote docile, and were scrapped by the New Republic as it didn't fit their morals to use such superweapons, even if they are arguably some of the most powerful we will see on this iceberg. The Death Star prototype was a superweapon, or to be more exact, a prototype of a superweapon developed by the Galactic Empire. It was constructed at the Maw installation a short while before the original Death Star was made. It is also worth noting that it was created by our dear old friend Bevel Lemelisk. The Death Star prototype, as you can probably guess by its creative name, was the testbed for the original Death Star. The Death Star prototype was a simple durasteel frame with a reactor core, a super laser, engines, and a control sector. The purpose of this prototype was to test if the super laser could be built and used. Upon completion of its construction, the weapon was tested, and once the feasibility of the super laser was proven to be real, the prototype was left alone within the Maw installation for nearly 15 years. When the New Republic launched an attack on the Maw installation 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, the manager of the research base, Tol Sivron, and some of its scientists used the Death Star prototype to escape the attack. The prototype and its crew fled to the nearby planet Kessel, where Sivron had the idea to see if the prototype's super laser was still functional. The super laser was fired at the planet Kessel, but due to the weapon never being properly calibrated, the laser missed the planet and instead hit its moon, which was blown up. Now, knowing that the super laser was still operational, Sivron decided to return to the Maw installation and destroy it, so that the data there could not end up in the New Republic's hands. While the prototype was returning to the battle at the Maw, the Millennium Falcon, crewed by Han Solo, Lando Calrissian, and Luke Skywalker's sweetheart Mara Jade, attached itself to the battle station prototype. Their plan was to sabotage it before it was able to destroy anything else by attaching explosive charges to its reactor core. However, the crew of the superweapon found out that they had unwelcome guests, and a couple of stormtroopers were sent out to attack them. Both stormtroopers were killed, but not before they were able to disarm all but one detonator, which exploded and damaged the reactor core. Soon, the Death Star prototype re-emerged at the Maw installation and entered the battle that was raging between General Wedge Antilles' New Republic fleet and the fleet of Imperial Admiral Natasi Dala, who had arrived after the Death Star prototype first escaped. However, Sivron only wished to destroy the Maw installation and refused to fire on Antilles' forces and help Dala. This was because she and her fleet had abandoned the Maw earlier and left Sivron and the scientists vulnerable to the attack by the New Republic. Due to the aforementioned explosion in the core, the superweapon was unable to fire, and a repair crew was immediately sent in to repair the damage. Meanwhile, the Millennium Falcon pulled away from the battle station and joined up with the rest of the Republic fleet. By the time the reactor core was fixed, the Maw installation was destroyed by Admiral Dala. Sivron instead ordered the super laser to be fired at one of the New Republic's Corellian corvettes, which was completely obliterated. They then proceeded to move in towards the New Republic fleet in an effort to completely annihilate it. As it looked like the New Republic fleet was about to have a surprise Elden Ring boss fight, the Jedi Knight Kib Duran arrived in the goddamn Sun Crusher! It's back, boys and girls! Hell yeah! As we talked about before, Duran was in his redemption arc at this point, after causing multiple thousands of deaths, and decided to destroy the Sun Crusher, while also taking out the Death Star prototype. The Virgin Duran fired his 2 remaining resonance torpedoes at the Chad Death Star prototype, but was dismayed to find that the damage they caused was insufficient to destroy or even disable the prototype. Reminder that these fucking torpedoes can blow up stars? Like, what the fuck, dude? Duran switched to Plan B and lured the Death Star prototype near one of the black holes that comprised the Maw. Both the Sun Crusher and the Death Star prototype entered the event horizon of the black hole and started to be pulled into it. While this was happening, the Death Star prototype fired its super laser at the Sun Crusher, which merely left a scratch on the crazy OP superweapon. Shortly thereafter, Kib Duran jettisoned himself out of the Sun Crusher, and both superweapons were ripped apart by the gravitational forces of the black hole. Everyone on board the prototype superweapon were killed as a result. Rumors would later spread that other similar Death Star prototypes were also built on other secret Imperial weapon installations, though this was never confirmed. And let's be honest, half the galaxy would be in shambles by now if that were the case, so I think it's easy to surmise that there was really only one Death Star prototype. The Sovereign-class Super Star Destroyers, alongside their bigger sisters, the Eclipse-class Super Star Destroyers, were supposed to be a vital part of the great fleet of the reborn Emperor Palpatine. The ship was 15 kilometers long and possessed an axial super laser that was weaker than the one on the Eclipse class, which in turn was a weaker version of the super laser used by the original Death Star.
All power to the laser batteries.
The axial super laser was also the reason why the ship's helm was designed to be 15,000 meters long, as the size allowed for the minimum space required to house the generators powering the super laser. It also hosted 500 heavy laser cannons, 500 turbo laser batteries, 75 ion cannons, and 100 tractor beam emplacements. Talk about overkill. And this, in addition to its big complement of crew and fighter squadrons, made it a terrifying opponent to face. However, all of this still made the Sovereign class somewhat inferior in comparison to its bigger sister class, the Eclipse class, thus in theory making the Sovereign class cheaper and faster to make. They were planned to come into service first and be the bulk of the reborn Emperor's fleet. But, seemingly due to the Emperor having really shitty priorities and management skills, only one known Sovereign class was seen during the conflict between the New Republic and the reborn Emperor's Dark Empire, and it was still under construction at this time. The Emperor decided to use the Eclipse-class Super Star Destroyers he had available to launch his campaign against the New Republic, and after the fall of the reborn Emperor, the construction of the single known Sovereign class ceased, and the design was swiftly scrapped. The Leviathans were a biological superweapon developed by the Dark Jedi, who would later become the first Sith 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Leviathans were massive, bioengineered, reptile-like creatures created with the express purpose of hunting and killing Jedi. They are argued to be some of the first biological superweapons ever made, as the art of bioengineering life for combat purposes was mastered primarily by the Dark Jedi that were exiled from the Jedi Order during the 100-Year Darkness, 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. They would also perfect the art of what would later be called Sith alchemy. While the first true creator of the Leviathans is disputed, the Dark Jedi Source of Sin would take credit of creating the first of these monsters. The Leviathans would spawn from eggs, and their larvae would appear as eyeless serpents which were aggressive towards anything alive. They would rapidly grow and turn into monsters that were bigger than an ATTE walker. They possessed 2 legs, 4 smaller forelimbs, and 2 tentacles around their massive, tooth-lined maw. A Leviathan was incredibly fast despite its size, and also super bloodthirsty and relentless, not giving up on hunting its prey unless either the prey or the Leviathan is dead. A Leviathan's hide was tough enough as to where it could swim in lava for a prolonged period of time, and could withstand lightsaber strikes. A Leviathan could also enter a hibernation state that could last indefinitely, awaiting to continue to cause more havoc at a moment's notice. What made a Leviathan particularly terrifying were huge blisters it possessed on its back. These blisters contained the tortured souls of the prey it consumed. These blisters had many purposes. First was to demoralize an opponent, knowing their life energy is going to stay within a horrible monster forevermore. The second purpose was to disrupt the Force users' senses by making them hear nothing but the pained screams of these tormented souls. The blisters would also be used by the Sith owner of the Leviathan to absorb the life force and knowledge of its prey at the time of their death. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that the Leviathans could also breathe fucking flames. So if you were ever unsure of how evil the Sith could be, they made their own dragons that would make their victims never able to find peace. Quite messed up, but also pretty freaking metal, you gotta admit. While the Leviathans were incredibly durable, they weren't unkillable. They could still be taken down by continuous lightsaber strikes and sustained blaster fire, and they were particularly vulnerable to Force lightning, which is actually quite a good idea on the Sith's part, as this would make sure they had an easy way to cull and control their pets. And also, since the Jedi don't really use Force lightning, except certain fringe cases, this vulnerability is moot when a Leviathan is chasing its intended prey. The Leviathans were also pretty primitive in intelligence, essentially just being mindless killing machines that only understood the concept of loyalty to their Sith masters. This would give their prey a chance to trick and outsmart it, as long as they could get rid of the monster completely. The Leviathans were first seen in action during the Battle of Korbos, which ended the 100-Year Darkness, where the exiled Dark Jedi fought the Jedi Order and used the Leviathans to reinforce their numbers. Despite this, the Jedi Order won, and the remaining Dark Jedi and their fearsome pets fled to Korriban. The Leviathans were put into hibernation, while the Dark Jedi alchemist Source of Sin would continue to develop and improve the bioengineered creatures. The end goal of this was to have an even stronger army of these monsters, ready to attack once the Dark Jedi forces were ready to terrorize the galaxy again. 100 years later, Sith Lord Remulus Drapa would take the remaining Leviathans from Korriban in a quest of vengeance against the Jedi Order. This would culminate in a massive battle on the planet Kesh, where the Leviathans would cause great death and destruction. However, the Sith that joined Drapa's mission grew disillusioned with him. They would then seal Drapa in an oubliette and put him in stasis. Afterwards, the remaining Leviathans would either be destroyed or go into hibernation once again. Nearly 4,000 years later, Drapa would suddenly awaken. Shortly after coming to his senses, he would use hundreds of Leviathans that were left hibernating on Kesh in an attempt to take it over and begin his quest to destroy the Jedi once again. This event would be referred to as Drapa's Rebellion. The Leviathans would kill and eat anything they could come across, Jedi, Sith, and civilians alike. The Leviathans present at this conflict would eventually die alongside their master Drapa at the hands of Sith descendants Parlin Spinner and Takara Hiltz. After Drapa's rebellion, it was believed that the Leviathans were made extinct. However, due to the Leviathans' ability to slumber for thousands of years if necessary, certain people were concerned that some of these monsters still remained in remote parts of the galaxy, waiting to be woken up. This was proven to be true when 12 years after the Battle of Yavin, a New Republic colony was established on the planet Korbos. Korbos. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The colony would suddenly send out a distress signal to Coruscant before going completely quiet. Luke Skywalker would dispatch Jedi Knights Kib Duron, yes, that Kib Duron, and Dorsk 82 to investigate what happened to the colony. Both Jedi discovered that the colony was wiped out by a very pissed off Leviathan who had survived the Battle of Korbos nearly 7,000 years ago and had spent these past millennia slumbering. The Leviathan was woken up by the noise made from the construction of the colony and went on a rampage through it. Hearing the news, Luke sent out 2 more Jedi to help Kip and Dorsk, Kirana T and Streen. During the fight against the monster, Kip climbed onto the Leviathan's back and discovered blisters containing the tormented souls of the colonists. He would then use his lightsaber to pierce most of these blisters and free the souls. This would hurt the monster, but didn't kill it. Kip did eventually kill the monster by stabbing it with a metal rod, after which a lightning bolt from an ensuing storm would smite the creature. He would then take the rod and pop the rest of the creature's blisters, freeing all the souls trapped within. The other Jedi soon joined Kip, and they thought that the problem was dealt with. However, a second Leviathan suddenly appeared, this one much larger and angrier than the last one. The Jedi were then forced to combat the abomination. They used their combined strength to push the Leviathan into a volcano, and as they watched it submerge under lava, they thought it was dead. However, Kip claimed he kept hearing screaming in his head, signaling that the creature might not be dead after all. His suspicions were correct, as the monster leaped out of the volcano without any visible damage, and kept fighting the 4 Jedi Knights. Eventually, Dorsk 82 discovered a functioning power generator, and Kip tricked the monster into biting a set of electrical cables connected to the generator. Dorsk 82 hit the switch, and in an instant, the huge monster was electrocuted and killed. No more sightings of Leviathans were reported throughout the galaxy. However, some still believe that countless other Leviathans, like the one seen on Korbos, were in hibernation throughout the many points in the galaxy, waiting to be awoken by their Sith masters for yet another war. Darth Momin's superweapon was an unnamed superweapon created and used by, you guessed it, Sith Lord Darth Momin, about 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Darth Momin was known as a great builder, and used his knowledge to create masterpieces to further his goals. One such masterpiece of his were the designs of a grand Sith fortress, which could tune into a locus of the dark side on a planet, and open the door to the dark side of the Force. This could give the person going through the door potentially unlimited power. This design would later be used to build Darth Vader's castle on Mustafar. The other masterpiece was Momin's aforementioned superweapon. It had the power to effortlessly demolish a city. While we don't know the mechanism by which it would do so, the weapon seemed to be a device running using a powerful engine that was connected to Momin's ship. It would release some sort of energy payload, which could cause massive explosions. The superweapon was powered by the dark side of the Force, and Momin intended to pour more of his Force energy into the weapon's engine using a Sith ritual. This act would freeze time in the destroyed area, freezing the horrified expressions of its victims for all eternity. Which was the Sith Lord's wet fantasy, apparently. The superweapon was only used once to demolish an unnamed city. As Momin laid waste to the metropolis, he intended to enact his plan and freeze the victims of this destruction in perpetuity. However, before he could finish the ritual, a group of Jedi boarded the starship he was on. The sudden burst of light side of the Force disrupted Momin's focus, and he lost control of the weapon's engine. The superweapon's engine completely disintegrated Momin in response, leaving behind only his mask, which still possessed his spirit. Momin's superweapon would be disabled and assumedly destroyed shortly thereafter. His mask, however, would exchange hands many times over the course of a millennia, until ultimately ending up in the possession of Darth Vader. The Eye of Palpatine, which is probably the most based name for a superweapon ever, was a massive asteroid-shaped superweapon developed and built by the Galactic Empire 18 years before the Battle of Yavin, roughly 2 years after the Galactic Republic was reorganized. The weapon was a massive spaceship which was covered by an even more massive asteroid the size of a small moon. While it isn't clear if the superweapon was built inside a carved-out asteroid, or if the ship was built and then covered in an asteroid shell, the reasoning behind this decision was clear: to maintain secrecy of the superweapon. As stated before, the Eye of Palpatine was built 2 years after the rise of the Galactic Empire, and at that point in time, Emperor Palpatine wasn't yet the be-all and end-all of the ruler of the galaxy, as he still had the Imperial Senate to contend with. The Imperial Senate would often push against the Emperor's more draconic decisions. Hence, any superweapons that were openly built using Imperial tax money would be greatly resisted. Additionally, this contention could cause an even bigger flow of defectors to the now slowly blooming rebellion. As a result, the Emperor needed to hide most of his superweapon projects, as was seen with the original Death Star. The same would apply for the Eye of Palpatine. It is also stated that Palpatine personally chose where to put new impact craters on the asteroid shell of the ship to make the disguise more authentic. I just like to imagine him going, "Yes, put a crater right there. Do it. Yeah, that's good." While the Eye of Palpatine was still around the same length as most Super Star Destroyers, its overall size was greater than most dreadnoughts the Empire would ever build. The Eye of Palpatine possessed several deflector shields and turbo lasers, making it super versatile in space combat. Its main weapon was a laser beam emitter, located at the center of the ring of turbo laser batteries at the front of the ship. This laser beam emitter would essentially be the miniature version of the super laser emitter used later by the Death Star. It could completely obliterate the target surface of the planet it was used on. And of course, the laser could also be used to obliterate any opposing capital ships. To add another layer of secrecy to the superweapon, the ship was completely unmanned, instead being fully operated by an artificial intelligence called the Will. And additionally, most of the stormtrooper passengers and TIE pilots that were supposed to be on board the ship weren't actually on the ship. They would instead be scattered in small groups across remote worlds in the outer rim of the galaxy, following benign orders while awaiting pickup by the Dreadnought at the moment's notice. The Eye of Palpatine was pre-programmed with a route that it followed. It would pick up troops stationed on these remote planets along the route. It would also brainwash these troops to be further subservient to the Empire. The chief reason for the construction of the Eye of Palpatine was to destroy the hidden Jedi stronghold on the planet Belsavis. The Jedi stronghold was hidden very well on the planet's icy wastes, which even most Imperial fleet bombardments could not get through. However, the Eye of Palpatine's central laser could easily melt through the frozen surface of the planet and destroy the stronghold. Despite its size and strength, the Eye of Palpatine was disabled on its way to Belsavis by 2 Jedi Knights shortly after it came into operation. Both Jedi perished while sabotaging the superweapon, but they succeeded in their mission and saved the other Jedi Knights and the younglings on Belsavis from ultimate destruction. One of the 2 Jedi, Callista Masana, would use her Force Spirit to turn off the AI controlling the ship, leaving it completely inert within an asteroid field, while also resulting in her spirit being bound to the ship. 30 years later, the ship would suddenly be reactivated by Irek Ismaran, the son of the former Emperor's hand, Roganda Ismaran. Irek had the unique power to control machines with his mind, and that's how he managed to reactivate the ship. The mother and son duo wanted to use the battleship to wage war against the New Republic. As the superweapon came back to life, it would immediately continue along its programmed route to Belsavis that it was supposed to complete 3 decades prior, despite Irek's best attempts to stop it. While most of the troopers that were supposed to be picked up by the Eye of Palpatine were long gone by the time the superweapon was reactivated, it still followed its mission objective. It would instead pick up natives of these remote planets and brainwash them to be loyal to the Empire. This would make the Eye of Palpatine have a crew consisting of Gamorreans, Tusken Raiders, Thalts, and even Jawas as it arrived over Belsavis. The New Republic did eventually come to know about the Eye of Palpatine making its way to Belsavis, and Luke Skywalker traveled to the planet to intercept the superweapon, alongside his Jedi students Nikus Mar and Krey Mingla. Shortly after the ship arrived over Belsavis, it was boarded by the 3 Jedi, who began brawling the oddball crew of the ship. They were assisted by Callista Masana's spirit, still trying to control the ship's AI. Eventually, Mar and Masana activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. Irek and Roganda, realizing their plan had been foiled, escaped. Nikos died while sabotaging the ship, and Krey, unable to live without her partner Nikos, chose to give her body to Callista, so she could have another chance at life. Callista, now in the body of Cray Mingla, would then escape alongside Luke as the ship exploded. Cray and Nikos both became Force spirits, and reunited once again. While the Eye of Palpatine was destroyed, one of the chief weapon designers of the former Galactic Empire, Kui Zhu, would suggest that there were more of these battle moons out there. Though, similarly to other such ghost stories, this fact would never be confirmed. The Infant of Shaa was a religious artifact crafted by a species called the Seilot. While it is unknown how long the artifact had existed, it was first discovered by outsiders 27 years before the Battle of Yavin, but myth of its existence had circulated even way before it was found. The Infant of Shaa served as a collector of Force energy that, when released, would emit a disturbance in the Force so great that it could create immense havoc on the planet it was used on. The artifact was made by the Seilot to honor their deity Shaa, and consisted of two parts: the Infant of Shaa, that could be used as a superweapon, and the Mother of Shaa, which is where the infant would be placed to control its energy output. Some time before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, an anti-Republic terrorist, General Ashar Korda, wanted the artifact so he could use it on Coruscant, the capital of the Republic. He hired the bounty hunters Jango Fett and Zam Wesell to get the artifact. Neither of the bounty hunters were told what the real purpose of the artifact was, merely that it was a rare collector piece that needed to be retrieved. Jango acquired the statue without much issue, though with some light bloodshed as would be expected of a simple man trying to make his way in the universe. Once the Mandalorian retrieved the artifact and handed it off to Korda's contact, the transaction was supposed to be completed. Afterwards, the crazed general prepared to use the Infant of Shaa to destroy Coruscant. Zam Wesell discovered Korda's destructive plot, and rushed back to Jango to request his assistance in stopping it. Initially, Jango was unwilling to join in rescuing Coruscant, and instead wanted to spend time with his son Boba. But he was convinced by Zam to join in the rescue mission when she asked Jango how many sons would be without any parents if he didn't help her. In parallel, the Jedi Council also learned of Korda's plot, but didn't know which planet he would target. The Council assigned multiple Jedi Masters to each watch over a major Republic world and stop Korda if he was discovered there. Jedi Master Yarel Poof, also known as Q-Tip Head, was assigned to oversee Coruscant. Korda planned to activate the artifact in the planet's central power relay, which would cause a massive planet-wide chain reaction of destruction. He was suddenly ambushed by Jango, Zam, and Master Poof, and they demanded that he surrendered and handed over the Infant of Shaa. Korda ordered his underlings to attack the three, while he continued to prepare the superweapon. To no one's surprise, Korda's underlings ate shit, but they held off the bounty hunters and the Jedi Master long enough for Korda to activate the artifact. Right as it was triggered, Master Poof cut the terrorist's hand off and grabbed the artifact with the Force. However, Korda, in a final act of desperation, lunged at the Jedi and stabbed him in the heart with a vibroblade. In response, Jango shot the anti-Republic extremist dead. The Jedi Master lost his focus and almost dropped the artifact onto the power relay, but Zam caught it last second with her shape-shifting powers. However, the artifact was already activated and could detonate at any moment. The dying Master Poof told Zam to give him the artifact, after which he used the last of his Force energy to defuse it and make it inert. Shortly thereafter, Master Poof passed away from his injury, sacrificing himself to save trillions of lives. Afterwards, Jango and Zam returned the Infant of Shaa back to the people of Seilot, and promised them to never return to the planet where the artifact resided, or reveal its location to anyone else. Their promise didn't really amount to much though, considering they both died not long after this incident. Yeah, get his ass, Mr. Jackson! Look at that head fly! Oh, crap. Sorry, kid. Moving on. The Ionic Ring ship was a superweapon created by the Empire and designed by Imperial Professor Ren Volz shortly after the Battle of Yavin. He designed it while being stationed on, and repeated with me, the Momin installation! However, unlike most superweapons made on that godforsaken space station, this one was actually made with good intentions at its base. The ship was originally designed as a weather control device. Professor Volz intended for it to be used to terraform inhospitable worlds so that they were able to house sentient life. The Ionic Ring ship consisted of several ion units joined together in the shape of a ring. I mean, go figure. These ion units, jointly named as the Climatizer, created a specific modulated ionic beam that could manipulate a planet's weather patterns. The ship was also capable of hyperspacing and could house a small crew of personnel. The first time the Ionic Ring ship was used was on the planet Zerm, where it was turned from a planet rife with chaotic storms into a hospitable planet as a test. Shortly thereafter, Professor Volz and his daughter Mira decided to use the Ionic Ring ship to terraform their world of Lil Kessel to also make it more hospitable. Suddenly, an Imperial Navy captain named Bzorn boarded the superweapon. He was tasked by Darth Vader to take the terraforming ship and use it to eradicate rebel cells hidden throughout different worlds by creating cataclysmic catastrophes on those planets. Bzorn took Mira hostage and demanded Professor Volz to use the ship against its intended purpose. He threatened to execute Mira if the professor wouldn't do as he was told. Mira was taken off ship and held under custody in an Imperial spaceport. After this, the superweapon was used a second time. It was used on the planet Ryan, which was a tropical paradise world that housed a rebel base. The Ionic Ring ship, being controlled by the blackmail Professor Volz, used its ionic beams to completely change the planet's ecosystem from a world filled with lush tropical jungles into one big frozen wasteland. Most of the flora and fauna on the planet quickly froze and died, dooming its remaining inhabitants to slowly starve or freeze to death. The weapon was then to be used on the planet Lil Kessel, which also housed the rebel base. But this time, Bzorn ordered the scientists to completely annihilate the planet with natural disasters, instead of just terraforming it. Unbeknownst to her father and Captain Bzorn, Mira managed to escape her captors and joined up with Han Solo and Chewbacca, who were doing a spice run for Jabba, and Luke Skywalker at the same spaceport where Mira was held. She informed them of Captain Bzorn's evil plan, and the group set off to the Kessel system. They got to Lil Kessel before the Ionic Ring ship, setting another new record for the Kessel run. Once the Ionic Ring ship arrived at Lil Kessel, it immediately began causing great cataclysms on the planet, threatening to completely devastate it. Han, Chewie, and Luke sneaked aboard the superweapon while Mira alerted her father that she was safe and free from custody. This immediately caused Volz to stop his forced destruction of his home planet. Meanwhile, Bzorn ordered his stormtroopers to kill the professor and the now discovered rebels aboard the ship. The captain and his stormtroopers were killed in the ensuing fight. The professor, realizing that the Ionic Ring ship is too dangerous to be kept around, made the ship self-destruct by reversing the energy flow back into the Climatizer, causing its reactor to melt down and explode. The Ionic Ring ship's concept would later be utilized by the other scientists at the Maw installation to develop a different type of weather control superweapon, which we looked at before, the Orbital Nightcloak. The Metal Crystal Phase Shifter. Try saying that 5 times fast. The Metal Crystal Phase Shifter, or the MCPS for short, was a superweapon developed by the Galactic Empire during the Galactic Civil War, though it was first used only 11 years after the Battle of Yavin. The MCPS was a weapon that could be mounted on starships, which used a special type of ammunition that would penetrate the starship's shields and go straight for the hull. Once in contact with the targeted starship's hull, the ammo would cause changes in the hull's physical properties, making it more powdery and weak. This would cause the affected starship's hull to be more vulnerable to other types of attacks. Additionally, if the starship's hull was to sustain continuous fire from the MCPS, it would result in the affected ship losing structural integrity, which would often result in it collapsing in on itself, or just simply breaking apart. The superweapon was so versatile that it would cause even Durasteel, one of the most durable metals in Star Wars, to turn into a porous and brittle material. The superweapon was developed within the Maw installation, which at this point is essentially a cash cow of content for this iceberg. And as with most superweapons developed there, the MCPS only saw use in combat after the Galactic Empire fell. The superweapon was first utilized during the Battle of the Maw, 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, where the weapon was used by an Imperial ship to destroy the New Republic's C-90 Corellian corvette. It was disabled shortly thereafter, and after the Maw installation was destroyed, the New Republic believed that the MCPS and all its research documents were gone alongside the installation. Unbeknownst to them, Natasi Dala, the Imperial Admiral overseeing the Maw installation, managed to download the files for the MCPS project alongside many other projects developed within the station. She then hyperspaced away on her Star Destroyer with the data, shortly after the research station was destroyed. Admiral Dala would later use the project blueprints to outfit her personal fleet, the Maw Irregular Fleet, with MCPSs. Her fleet utilized this unique weapon type in future conflicts. One such conflict was the Second Battle of Fondor. The Second Battle of Fondor was a conflict that raged during the Second Galactic Civil War, 40 years after the Battle of Yavin. It was caused because the Corellian system planets seceded from the Galactic Alliance, forming their own confederacy. Same shit, different day, I swear to God. Many planets would quickly join the confederacy. One such case was the planet Fondor, which was one of the top ship manufacturers in the galaxy. Jacen Solo, the son of Han and Leia, and the joint chief of state for the Galactic Alliance, deemed it necessary to retake Fondor, and launched a campaign against the world. Jacen was a divisive leader within the Alliance, as he was slowly becoming corrupted by the dark side of the Force. During the conflict, the Galactic Alliance became divided even further, as another joint chief of state for the Galactic Alliance, Shaa, plotted to overthrow Jacen, as he had basically turned into Emperor Palpatine Part 2. Eventually, the Battle of Fondor went from Galactic Alliance versus the Confederacy to a battle between forces loyal to Solo and forces loyal to Neathal. During the climax of this great battle, Admiral Natasi Dala joined the battle with her Maw Irregular Fleet and sided with Neathal and used the MCPSs against Solo's ships. The superweapon decimated Jacen Solo's fleet, which forced him to retreat from the battle with his leftover forces. Admiral Dala would later remove the MCPSs from her fleet's arsenal, as the upkeep for the superweapon was way too expensive and not worth the effect it had in battle compared to other weaponry. To add on to the last part as to why the weapon was not deemed worthy of being kept around, I think it's mostly due to its effectiveness in comparison to other starship weapons. A lesser used type of weaponry seen in Star Wars are the so-called mass drivers, which launch superheated chunks of metal at enemy ships. Since Star Wars shielding technology can only block against energy-based ordnance, the mass driver bullets go straight through the shields and punch through the hull as well. So a mass driver essentially does the same as MCPS, but with less upkeep since, well, you're basically just launching hot balls of metal at your opponents. This is not even mentioning the fact that even mass driver technology itself isn't used often, due to the fact that turbo laser weaponry is deemed as the most optimal type of weaponry to be used against frigates and capital ships. So overall, although flashy, the MCPS seems like more of a hassle than it's worth. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. The Starflash was a series of ancient superweapons created by an unknown race of aliens, many millennia before the Battle of Yavin. While not given a proper description, a Starflash could be loaded onto a ship and was capable of sending out a powerful blast of tachyonic and lightspeed energy at a star, causing a return burst that was even more powerful. This essentially meant that the superweapon would have to be used while near the target, and its use would obliterate the superweapon, its user, and its target all in one swift act of carnage. Makes you wonder what sort of intergalactic Zaza these ancient unknown aliens were smoking to create such an odd superweapon, but I digress. One such Starflash was discovered by the Chiss Ascendancy 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. For those not in the know, the Chiss Ascendancy was one of the leading governments within the unknown regions of the galaxy, for which the Galactic Republic had no jurisdiction within. Due to its destructive nature, the weapon was hidden away by the Chiss with the intent of never being used. However, hundreds of years later, the Chiss Ascendancy engaged in a war with an unknown race of aliens, though worth noting that they are not the same unknown aliens that created the weapon. The enemy of the Chiss managed to conquer almost every planet the Ascendancy controlled, causing the remaining Chiss to grow desperate and resort to using the Starflash. The weapon would be operated by 20 Chiss volunteers, who would fly a ship into the middle of the enemy fleet, which was preparing to assault Chila, the capital planet of the Chiss Ascendancy. The weapon was then activated and fired at Chila's sun. This resulted in the star firing an even more powerful burst of energy, which completely obliterated everything near Chila, including the Starflash, the 20 Chiss volunteers, and the entire opposing fleet. Although they perished, the sacrifice of those 20 Chiss saved their race from being completely exterminated. These 20 volunteers were warriors belonging to the Myth family, the dynasty that would many millennia later adopt the fan-beloved Grand Admiral Thrawn. As an unexpected side effect of the use of the superweapon, Chila's sun dimmed considerably for many years following the event, causing the surface of the Chiss capital to cool down and become frozen. This would force the Chiss living on the planet to begin living underground or move to other planets. The patriarchs of the Chiss Ascendancy decided to suppress the truth about the use of the first Starflash, and in case other such Starflashes would be discovered, their existence would be hidden from the general public as well. Only the most trusted individuals within the Chiss Patriarchy would be allowed to know of the truth behind these ancient superweapons. A second Starflash would be discovered by the Chiss Ascendancy about 1,000 years after the first one was used. This one was also hidden away, this time in a secret vault of the Chiss research organization named the Universal Analysis Group. During the Clone Wars many millennia later, Thrawn, then still a senior commander within the Chiss Ascendancy, would be permitted to learn about the true history of the Battle of Chila and the existence of the Starflashes. We haven't seen the second Starflash be used in any Star Wars media as of the writing of the script, though I suspect Grand Admiral Thrawn would have acquired it at some point in time, considering he was told where it was hidden. And additionally, this superweapon and its associated lore is part of Disney canon, so we shall most likely see it come into play in some future piece of Star Wars media. Perhaps we could see the Starflash in a future season of the Ahsoka show, taking into account the fact that Grand Admiral Thrawn is the main villain of it. Could be a nice plot device for the show, I think. But only time will tell. Thank you for reaching the end of Layer 3 of the Ultimate Star Wars Superweapon Iceberg, and Part 2 of this video series. This part was very fun to make due to how crazy many of the Extended Universe superweapons are, and I hope it was doubly as fun for you to watch. I am quite excited to start working on the third and final part of this video series, though once again, I cannot promise a concrete date of when I shall post it, though it's most likely sometime after summer, as I think we should all appreciate the season and spend it outside, enjoying the heat and all. No, not like that! Jesus Christ, bro! Anyways, on this note, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and the rest of your week. Tell someone something nice today, make people smile, and take care of yourself. Be like Luke Skywalker. And once again, may the Force be with you always.